Hello. Warped, Chapter 1. 30, April 1909, New London Walls. The gargantuan ship stood in the harbor with its foreboding iron structure. The engineers named her the Majestic. The vessel stood taller than any other ship in the harbor, made mainly of steel. It carried with it electric lights and the new telephones that only a few people could afford in their homes at this time. It stood so tall that those waiting for their chance to board worried a little. The ship swayed gently with the water. It appeared that with one strong wave, the vessel might lose its reliable way and topple over to crush the passengers on the dock. People spoke of it with awe and excitement. This ship, the Majestic, the one they were saying would be unsinkable, the first ship that made use of the engineering brought over the portal from Earth to Comina. Comina ran parallel to Earth on the same timeline. However, the waters of Comina held a lavender-colored hue. Comina also chose to move at a slower pace when it came to embracing new technology and new ideas. The councils of Comina felt Earth moved too quickly, and they would prefer a slower rate of improvement to allow them time to think through the problems that could arise from the new inventions, no matter how amazing those inventions appeared. Elizabeth Strong stood on the deck of the Majestic, allowing the throng's joy and anticipation below to radiate up to her. She usually kept a shield up to prevent her from becoming overwhelmed with others' emotions and thoughts. Today, though, she didn't mind sharing their joy. If the passengers had looked closer, or even those who explored the first-class deck, they would have seen a young woman of 5 feet, plump in shape, long red hair with blonde streaks and freckles that sprinkled them across her cheeks and nose, and expressive brown eyes with gold and green flecks. Those eyes often got Elizabeth into trouble. Her father, Dr. Nathaniel Strong, often teased his daughter that she would be terrible at playing any games of chance because her emotions showed through her eyes. Elizabeth looked all of 18 years old, which betrayed the fact that 25 years ago, Dr. Nathaniel and Eleanor Strong had opened their hearts and homes to a girl savagely beaten, tormented, broken, and mute. Elizabeth had arrived shortly before her 16th birthday and now stood on the deck of the ship at 41 years of age. Not that anyone would have guessed this at first glance. Together with her parents and Mrs. Mayhew, the family friend and housekeeper, Elizabeth, with the aid of a personal tutor, learned how to speak using sign language. It made communication possible, and then the Strongs set about teaching her to read and write and educating Elizabeth. Elizabeth loved her parents and had rejoiced with them when they had welcomed a new baby Abigail into their home 2 years after Elizabeth and Catherine's arrival. Eleanor Strong had been unable to conceive until one rainy afternoon. Eleanor had played the piano for Elizabeth after Elizabeth's piano lesson. Elizabeth listened quietly as she sat beside her mama, listening to her mama's heart cry, and Elizabeth's heart broke with her. Finally standing, Elizabeth laid a gentle hand on her mama's shoulder as she played and healed her mother. That brief moment enabled the Strongs to conceive Abigail, but her delivery had almost killed Eleanor, and she never conceived again. Elizabeth and Catherine had enjoyed playing with Abigail as the little girl grew. Abigail never thought anything of her sister in the mirror until she grew older and realized no one else had 2 sisters, one whom people could only see if the other sister allowed her to be seen. Elizabeth didn't mind sharing them or her body with her sister Catherine. What Elizabeth and Catherine both cared about was that people could only see Catherine if Elizabeth stood in front of a mirror. Sadly, experience had taught both girls that not everyone would understand their predicament. The girls had rejoiced with their family when Abigail had met and fallen in love with Dr. Michael Van Geren. The family had returned from Beulah to Walls 2 years ago to see Abigail marry. Knowing Abigail was settled nicely with a new baby and a husband, it was time to return to Bellah. The family boarded the Majestic after many tears 2 days before. They stayed at a hotel near the docks. Elizabeth stood waiting patiently, but also anxious to begin the voyage. Elizabeth had begun feeling that change was coming. Several months prior, during her quiet time with God, she sensed she would need to leave her family soon. And while the idea of leaving her parents came with a little anxiety, she also welcomed the idea of change and following the path God laid out before her. But for now, she would return to their rooms and aid in the unpacking of their trunks. The voyage, slated to take 2 to 3 weeks to cross the Great Kynan Ocean, meant her mother Eleanor had insisted on a full set of trunks and apparel. Elizabeth turned and had almost reached the hallway when a young man came quickly past her. He had excused himself, but his joy and anticipation radiated from him so forcefully, not even Elizabeth's shield could shut out his feelings. She paused and watched as the man stood looking and scanning the crowds for someone. She observed a tall black man in a tan suit, clean-shaven and smiling. His curly black hair cut close to his head, and he obviously came from a family of privilege. Walls had ended slavery 100 years before. Many black men and women had already begun flourishing under their freedom. Elizabeth and her parents longed for the day when Bellah would follow suit. Elizabeth watched as a steward walked past her from one of the many hallways on the ship, calling out, "Thomas Newton? I am searching for a Thomas Newton." The man turned and held up his hand for the steward to see. "I am Thomas Newton." He reached into his pocket and inconspicuously placed a tip in the hand of the young steward. The young man grinned broadly at Mr. Newton, thanked him, and left him alone. It appeared that Mr. Newton tipped very well. Elizabeth knew she should go, but something compelled her to remain. As Mr. Newton looked over the note given to him, she felt his hope and anticipation crash around him. He balled the letter into his hands and put it into his pocket and stormed past Elizabeth to his stateroom. Elizabeth decided to return to her rooms, but first she stopped at the ship's library and borrowed a book to read. She felt no need to sleep. After Elizabeth finished assisting her mamma and Mrs. Mayhew unpack their trunks, she grabbed a small throw, tossing it over her legs, and she settled down on the settee to read while everyone rested. I hope you enjoyed Chapter 1 of Warped.